You can start tomatoes in 3 different ways, and I'm going to talk about each one of those techniques in this video. The first one is the most interesting, and it is propagating tomato plants through cutting. I really love this method because it provides a shortcut to getting a much larger tomato more quickly. It also can provide you with tomatoes that are adapted to your space if you have a particular tomato variety that's done well in your yard, and it's free. You want to choose a tomato plant that's very healthy from your garden or from a friend's garden. You want to choose a side shoot called a sucker that's 6 to 8 inches long, preferably without a bloom. Cut just below a leaf node so that you get good root development. Put that cutting immediately into cool water. You can put your cutting on a windowsill or under grow lights, and within about a week or so you will start seeing roots develop. I like to wait another week or two beyond that to make sure that I have a good healthy set of roots before I pot that cutting into soil. After potting my cutting up into soil, I like to give it a couple more weeks to make sure those roots are nice and established before moving it outside. You can take the cutting using this technique, but instead of putting it in water, you can put it right into some moist soil. I think that the water method speeds up the process a little bit, but the soil method can work just as well. If you choose to pot it into soil, just do the same thing. You want to moisten the soil, you want to put it on a sunny windowsill or under grow lights for a few weeks, and then your tomato cutting will be ready to go outside. Starting tomatoes from seeds will give you access to many more varieties than purchasing transplants at the store. Hopefully by now, if you've watched my first 2 videos in my tomato growing series, you're well versed in the vocabulary that will help you choose the best tomato variety for you. If you haven't watched those videos yet, I will link them below, and you can check out all of those vocabulary terms to choose the best tomato plant for your space. If you have tomato seeds left from previous seasons, just know the viability of those seeds decreases after 4 years. I break this rule pretty much every season, but to get around the fact that I will probably get poor germination, I just plant extra seeds. So if you have seeds that you want to use and not throw away, try it and then just plant extra. Once you have your seeds, you'll want to start with clean seedling trays or containers. I reuse my seed trays every year, so to make sure that they're clean and disease-free, I will clean them with a solution of 50% white vinegar and 50% water. I just rinse off those seedling trays, make sure I get all of the loose debris off. I will spray them down with the vinegar and water solution, let it sit in the sun for about 30 minutes, and then I spray them down with water, and they should be good to go. Seeds are not picky when it comes to the kind of container you put them in, as long as they have enough room and good drainage. When I was a first-time gardener and on a very tiny budget, I would save my yogurt and sour cream containers, clean them and store them for the year, and then by the time the gardening season rolled around, I would have containers to be able to plant my plants in. Later, I graduated into using seedling trays that I could reuse every season. You can use all kinds of containers like milk cartons or solo cups or recycled pots or trays from nurseries or garden centers. As long as they're nice and clean and they provide adequate drainage, the seeds are not going to mine and they'll grow just fine. So there's no need to spend a bunch of money on containers to start your seeds in. Now I've graduated to these self-watering seedling trays. They have a water wicking mat, so as long as I keep the reservoir and the bottom filled up, that mat will wick the water up and make contact with the bottom of the seedling tray, and then the soil will soak up that water. These seedling trays were pretty pricey, but I chose them because I travel frequently and I needed a way to keep my seedlings watered for at least a week at a time while I'm away. If you're interested in these self-watering trays, I got them from Gardener's Supply, and I will leave a link below so that you can check them out for yourself. If you want to be plastic free, you can also use soil blockers to take the soil that you have and mold it into a block that you can plant your seedling directly into. I don't have any footage for that right now, but if you Google soil blockers, you can find all the information that you need. In gardening circles, you may hear the term soil media in reference to the material you're using to grow your plants in. Soil media needs to provide 3 things. It needs to hold moisture, but not too much. It needs to provide adequate drainage, and it needs to have a fine enough texture that delicate roots can move through. Many seed starting mixes are available from garden centers, but they can be expensive and the quality can vary from brand to brand. Mixing your own seed starting mix by comparison can be inexpensive and pretty easy. If you're interested in doing that, I have a video all about it. I even include my own seed starting mix recipe. I don't have time to to go through all of the details here on this video, but if you want to check that out, I will leave the link to the video in the description below. Most seed starting mixes are sterile and soilless, and it might seem strange to plant seeds in a soilless mixture, but they are free of diseases and pests, so it's one less thing that your seedling has to worry about as it's trying to get established. You can use what you have if you don't have access to or time to make your own seed starting mix. As I said, when I started out, I was on a really small budget and I didn't always have the money to buy a specialty seed starting mix or even the ingredients to mix my own. So often I would have to use whatever I had on hand, a leftover bag from the last season or what have you. Was it always soilless? No, but it was either that or just not start seeds. Just do the best that you can. Gardening is not about perfection. It's about using what you have, where you are, and making the best of your situation. Remember that a good seed starting mix needs to have a fine texture. Large pieces like bark or twigs or soil clumps can impede the seedling from breaking the surface, and it can also prevent those fine, delicate roots from moving through the soil and becoming established well. To get around this, I have a soil sieve that I use, and I will run any kind of potting soil through it and remove all of those chunks. I'll then take those chunks and either throw them into my compost bin or I will throw them onto my garden bed so that I can add that texture and organic matter to my soil and not waste anything. I use this sieve, which also serves me well for cleaning larger seeds that I save from my garden. If you don't have a sieve, that's okay. Just try to pick out the larger pieces as you go. You'll want to moisten the soil before you use it for planting. Oftentimes, bagged soil that has been sitting around for a while can become quite hydrophobic. Hydrophobic means the soil repels water rather than absorbs it. And you'll notice this is the case if you're using old soil and the water that you put on it just kind of runs off the surface and doesn't soak in. I like to put my soil in a bucket the day before I'm going to use it. I will spray it with a garden hose and mix it really well. I don't want it to be soggy or soupy, but I just want to make sure that it's got enough water in it. And I let that sit overnight so that it has enough time to absorb the water. By the next morning or afternoon, it's rehydrated and ready to put into my seedling trays or containers. This is going to result in better seed germination because your seeds are not going to be packed into dry soil where they're going to dry out rather than sprout. Now that you have clean containers that are filled with well-hydrated soil, you're ready to plant your tomato seeds. Tomato seeds are pretty easy to plant. You don't have to soak them overnight like you do some varieties of plants. Plant your tomato seeds about 1/4 of an inch deep and then cover them with soil. I like to lightly tamp them down just to make sure that they have good contact with the soil. After that, just give your seedling trays or your containers a gentle drink of water. I like to cover my trays with humidity domes just to keep the moisture in and to make sure the soil stays well hydrated and doesn't dry out. After I see the seedlings emerge, I will remove that humidity dome because I don't want the high moisture trapped underneath the dome to promote fungal growth. Damping off is caused by fungus attacking the lower part of the stem of a seedling. And if you've ever seen the stem of a seedling pinch off and the little seedling kind of tip over, that's because you've got a fungus infecting that stem and it's going to kill your seedling. So as soon as you see the seedlings emerge, if you have them covered, get that humidity dome off. Tomato seeds need warmth to germinate, ideally around 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I keep my house at about 70 degrees in the wintertime, and that seems to be just warm enough to get the seeds to germinate well. If your house is a little bit cooler than that, then you can use a heating mat like this one to keep your trays and your soil warm while your tomato seeds are germinating. When I was gardening in Tucson, I had a very tiny house. It was less than 800 square feet, so I had no space for seedling trays indoors. To get around that, I bought an inexpensive greenhouse to put outside on the south side of my yard. I ran weatherproof extension cords to plug my heat mats into, and I set my seedling trays on top. Now this took a little more time to manage because I had to go out and open up the greenhouse during the day so it didn't get too hot, and then I had to remember to close it in the evening so that my seedlings didn't get too cold. And because of the temperate climate in Tucson, I was able to do this outside with no problems. Now if you're living in a little bit cooler climate, what you could do to get around it is to keep some of your seedling trays inside if you have the room until you see the seedlings start to emerge. Once they emerge, you can put them outside in a protected area, like in an inexpensive greenhouse, so that way they have access to good light while they're growing. You should see your seedlings start to emerge after 5 to 10 days, so just keep an eye on that. If you don't have the time or space or the equipment to start seeds, you can buy tomato seedlings at a lot of local garden centers in Tucson. If you've been watching my videos for very long, you know I'm a big fan of Native Seed Search, which is a local nonprofit in Tucson that has arid adapted seeds for sale. They have a plant sale twice a year, usually in the spring and also around monsoon season, where you can buy seedlings that they have started for you. And these varieties are going to be varieties that will grow well in Tucson. So if you don't have the time or the space to start your own seeds and you want to get something that is more locally adapted, definitely check out their website to see when they're having their plant sale. It should be coming up quite soon this spring. Now you've got 3 different ways to start your tomato plants, and the next thing you need to think about is how to care for those seedlings. And one of the main things you need to think about is how to provide adequate light for them. I have 2 different light setups that I can show you, but to do that we have to take a field trip inside. It doesn't seem right that I'm in my garage showing you a shelf with a bunch of canning junk on it, but this is the original shelf I used to start my seedlings on. So this is just one of those heavy-duty wire shelves that you get from Home Depot. In the beginning, I couldn't afford anything fancy, so the setup I used was this black shelf that I got from Lowe's and a couple of fluorescent shop lights. This is not a fluorescent shop light, but it is another grow light that I got later on. But imagine this is a shop light. I would tie a string around each end of this light, and then I would tie another string to the shelf that it hung from. And that allowed me to raise and lower it depending on the height of the seedlings, so that I could get the light pretty close to the seedlings and prevent them from getting leggy. This was a low-cost solution that allowed me to start my seedlings indoors. Now, this is not when I was living in that tiny house in Tucson. This is way back when, 20 years ago, when I was still living in Ohio, and there was no chance that I could start seedlings in a greenhouse outside there during our cold winters. So this is the solution I had. We had an old unfinished basement, and this is where I put the shelf. 2 years ago, I invested in 2 seed starting racks from Gardener's Supply. Now, I'm not gonna lie, these were very expensive, and hopefully I can use them for years to come. I do this for a living. I write horticultural publications for Pima County Master Gardeners. I write a monthly gardening column for a local magazine called Desert Leaf, and I do my own video and writing projects. All of that requires me to have to start a lot of seeds and grow a lot of plants. So I need space, and I need an effective way to start seeds that end up being healthy plants that I can put out into my garden and video and photograph later. If this weren't the case, I would still be happily using my homemade setup from Lowe's that I just showed you. So don't feel like you have to have an expensive or an elaborate setup. Gardening can be very simple, and it can be done on a small budget if you're creative. I've also started seeds on a sunny south-facing windowsill. Depending on the time of year, this may not provide enough light, but you can try this and monitor how your seedlings are doing. Alternatively, you can carry your trays outside into indirect sun during the day, temperature permitting, and bring them back in at night. It's more work, but it is a solution. At this point, your seedlings are going to need at least 8 hours of sunlight. However you provide that is up to you, but you want to make sure they're getting the adequate light they need so they don't become weak and leggy. If it's not warm enough to plant your tomato seedlings outside and they have outgrown their seedling trays or their pots that you've had them growing in, you can move them to a larger pot to give a little more time for them to grow and develop before it's time to move them outside. This process is called uppotting. Tomato seedlings need to develop nice sturdy stems to keep them well supported once they are moved outside. If you don't provide adequate light, they will become leggy and floppy, but they also need a little bit of stimulation to keep them growing strong. I provide that in 2 different ways. I will either run my hands over them a couple of times a day, allowing me to check on and admire them, or I'll run a fan for a few hours a day on low. Running the fan can cause the soil to dry out faster, so just make sure you're monitoring your soil moisture if you're using fans. When the time is right and the danger of frost has passed outside, it will be time to plant your tomatoes in the garden. But that is the topic for our next tomato video in this series. Next week we will be talking about different ways to plant your tomatoes outside in the garden, which is very exciting, and we'll be talking about a couple of different techniques to set you up for success. I'm Kara from Arizona. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy gardening.